Okay, we're back. Really enjoying that groovy music. We'll interrupt it for a really fascinating panel that we have coming up. Every breath you take, the future of indoor air quality. How can information technology make our lives better through improved indoor air quality? Indoor air pollution can cause a wide range of health complications, with estimates of more than 3.8 million human lives lost globally each year to illnesses induced by indoor pollutants. This panel will explore how IT will enhance ventilation and reduce indoor air pollution and pathogens to achieve a higher quality of life worldwide, particularly for disadvantaged groups. As before, I really want to recognize and call out the contributions from our colleague Michele Barbato, Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at UC Davis and Director of the Citrus Climate Initiative, and Todd Stoltz, who's the Director of Business Development at UC Davis Health and staff member at Citrus. They were the ones who really organized and spearheaded this panel. The UC Davis College of Engineering creates a sustainable world through socially responsible engineering. UC Davis is a home of go-getters, change makers, and problem solvers who make their mark at one of the top US public universities. Davis's efforts focus on improving lives, transforming care, and sharing knowledge to advance health for all. So I'm really delighted to think about how indoor air quality can be part of this conversation around smarter tech for a resilient future. And I will turn it over to UC Davis Engineering Dean Richard Corsi.
Yeah, thank you so much, Camille. And you didn't see me snapping my fingers to the music as we were waiting. I look pretty cool doing it, actually. So welcome to the Edge in Tech Symposium panel discussion entitled Every Breath You Take, the Future of Indoor Air Quality. As Camille said, I'm Rich Corsi, and I'm honored to serve as the Dean of the College of Engineering at UC Davis. I've spent most of my career researching indoor air quality and teaching relevant courses. And I do so because I'm passionate about how important this topic is for human health. And just to kind of set us up before we get to the panel questions, Americans are nothing short of indoor creatures. Before the pandemic, the average American lived to be 79 years old. We spent 56 of those 79 years inside of our homes, almost 70 total years indoors, 56 years in our homes, 28 years in our bedrooms, 6 years outdoors, and 4 years in motorized transit. Our lifetime inhalation dose of air pollution is dominated by what we breathe indoors. And that's true also of pollutants of outdoor origin. We breathe in most of those pollutants while we're inside buildings. It can be reasonably argued that indoor air quality has a greater impact on human health than any other environmental quality issue. And that's well known to be true at the global scale. I find that exciting in that it provides a possibility to rethink buildings, to rethink indoor environments as sanctuaries of indoor air. Yet there are little regulations to address indoor air quality except in heavy industrialized workplaces. Yet research related to indoor air quality lags far behind all other environmental issues. In California, we need buildings to work better for us during wildfire season. We need buildings to work better for us to protect us from valley fever. We need buildings to work better for us to reduce our exposure to photochemical smog and transportation-related air pollution for those who live or learn or work near major roadways. In California, we need our buildings to reduce our exposure to pollutants of indoor origin and to design and operate buildings to reduce the spread of airborne infectious disease, whether it's influenza or colds or COVID-19. So there's tremendous opportunities for us to do better. And there are tremendous opportunities for us to take advantage of technology to help us do better. And we're fortunate today to have a great panel to discuss these issues. And that panel includes individuals with a wide range of expertise and who are working in very different ways to improve indoor air quality. And rather than me say any more and continue to speak, which I shouldn't, our panelists should be speaking, I'm going to move to having each of them introduce themselves. So panelists, buckle your seatbelts, get ready. And I'm going to call your name. And when I do, please introduce yourself. Repeat your name, tell us your occupation, maybe 2 sentences about what you do, what your occupation means. And then right after that, I want you to tell the audience why you specifically have decided to focus your attention on air quality in general and indoor air quality specifically. Was it something personal in your life? Was it a course you took, a book you read? a dream you had. So those are the things: name, occupation, what you do, and why. And I'm going to start with Elizabeth Scheel from the California Air Resources Board.
Thanks, Rich. I'm Elizabeth Sheely. I am the Research Division Chief at the California Air Resources Board. And what I do is I oversee the researchers within the agency. So we provide support on rules and regulations and really help with the scientific foundation on which all of the rules and regs are built upon. And within that, we have a whole health group and a whole section devoted to indoor air. And it's one of the few areas in the research division where we actually have some regulations as well. So we have regulations that are related to air purification, air filtration, certifying devices that are used in people's homes, and that are used, not only the portable ones, but the ones that are in duct as well. We have expanded into that. And that's because of what Rich was saying in terms of the importance of indoor air and really looking at those devices and ozone. Personally, when I came to air quality, I've always been, I'm an outdoor person. I love being active and have always been passionate about protecting people, protecting the environment, making sure that is available to all of us in the future. And so I started my career in climate change because I saw the risk that poses to the future. And over the years, that's kind of expanded as my career has grown. And actually, it was only really 5 years ago when I became, 4 or 5 years ago, when I became the research division chief and was exposed to the importance of indoor air that I became passionate about it. It is an area where we, like was said, we spend the majority of our time indoors. And that's even more so, the importance of your home when we're now all working from home as well, and the equity issues around the differences in people's home and quality of home, I think becomes even more important now. So I've said a lot, so I will pass it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Next up is Christina Davis, College of Engineering at UC Davis.
Hi, I'm a professor in mechanical and aerospace engineering here on campus, but I also have another role, which is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Interdisciplinary Research and Strategic Initiatives, where I try to facilitate these types of things, which is, having people from different disciplines come together and work on problems. So I am specifically for my research interested in chemical sensors that can actually tell us a lot about what's in an environment. Over the last couple of years with the wildfires, we all became very aware of how much we can smell or sense in an environment. But there's a lack of chemical sensors in this kind of space. And so we're working on next generation versions of those. I'll talk about it a little bit later. But for me, I think that the wildfires in Northern California, which are so different today than when I moved here, 20 years ago, that was definitely a motivation for me to start working in this field, because I think that there's so much that low cost portable sensors can offer in terms of data and information as we make decisions.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. Let's go with Vinny Eng of Safer Together.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vinny Eng. I'm part of a nonprofit health equity organization here in San Francisco called Safer Together. We emerged during COVID-19 as a clinical diagnostic testing lab, increasing access to COVID testing for very specific target populations and neighborhoods that we anticipated would be lacking in access to public health tools such as diagnostic testing. And through the course of our work in these communities, we realized that we needed to invest in a more durable community care infrastructure, particularly as the pandemic evolved and we were facing circulation of a respiratory pathogen that was impacting communities disparately. And so we have grown our attention to layer in additional protections for these neighborhoods and communities to include sharing low-cost air filtration devices, one in particular designed by Dr. Corsi himself, the Corsi Rosenthal box, in support of short-term fixes to improve indoor air quality in hopes of improving and reducing ongoing transmission of a disease that continues to circulate in our communities in disproportionately. So glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Vinny. And we'll go with Seema Bangar of U.S. Green Building Council.
Hi, I'm Seema Bangar, repeating my name, Rich, even though you said it perfectly. I am going to be starting this new position at the U.S. Green Building Council next month, where my focus will be on healthy buildings and communities. And previous to that, ever since making the switch from academia into industry, I've worked in commercial real estate and in the technology development side. So very much see my niche as being that translator or bridge between science, tech, research, which is my one hat and one long spell, into the implementation side, especially in commercial real estate. Mm-hmm. And in terms of how I got interested in indoor air quality, I grew up in Bombay, so a place where effects of environmental pollution on health are very viscerally, daily felt by everyone. And, I was very clear from the beginning, I wanted to be on the root cause prevention side and not on the medical treatment side of this health bucket. And initially that took me into social sciences and water and sanitation. So that was my path. And it was really just an opportunity that arose to work with a very inspiring leader, professor, and to go back and work with communities back home. If I switched over to indoor air quality, that made me do it. And since then, my motto has been to follow the people, and you can't go wrong. So here I am, still following the people into indoor air quality.
Very good. Thank you, Seema. And now I'm going to ask each of you a somewhat open-ended question, but I ask you to keep your remarks down to about 3 minutes or so if possible. And some of you probably have already addressed some of the things that I'm going to ask you, but this gives you an opportunity to expand on them if you'd like. And we'll start with Seema. So Seema, you have significant experience dealing with indoor air quality in commercial buildings. And can you explain your experience with that building sector specifically, and particularly what you think are some of the major issues are with respect to indoor air quality in commercial buildings? What are the issues that still need to be tackled?
Yeah, my experience in commercial real estate has really been divided between two sides, in the sense of, on the one hand, the owner, operator, tenant side, where I was hired into a firm to implement sensors in buildings, in a large global portfolio of buildings, to meet health, sustainability, resilience goals. And then on the other end, before that, at the technology development side, where I was looking more from the vendor side, so to say, and helping to refine and develop the technology itself. So, with the experience that I gained through that, actually many of the issues that I encountered have been mentioned, are broad and extend beyond indoor air quality, have been mentioned today. And so I'll just call out 3 that really stood out from my experience. So, first in our sector being the building sector, the standards and regulations are largely either prescriptive and applying to design, or then on the operational side, the expectations tend to be more reactive or on the right response. So we've ended up with this gap between what not just advances in monitoring and in data management technology have enabled, but also in where our aspirations are at, especially post-COVID, in terms of proactive operational performance, verification and tracking on the one hand, and then where conventional practice is at. So I think Stacy Mahler in the opening keynote provided a really great overview of why these changes, which are very compelling on the why and what side, continue to be challenging to implement at scale, especially. So that's number one. A second issue is really related to the fragmentation of technology infrastructure in buildings. James Dice, a person at Nexus Labs, speaks very eloquently to the sort of horizontal architecture is what he calls it, the level of integration and coordination, among building systems, broadly speaking, that is needed before a single application like indoor air quality sensors can be viable. Again, pilot scale is very doable, even with a fragmented technology platform, but to really be viable at scale and impactful over extended timescales. And then finally, very specific to indoor air quality, I'll say there are just these very unresolved questions of accountability and ownership. The image in my mind is really one of, for parents might be familiar with that children's book, Are You My Mother? I always think of indoor air quality asking that. Whose job is it in the building sector to provide clean air? And, all of us here often will say it's everyone's job. And to a large extent, that's true. All different functions, health and safety, design, facilities management, sustainability, and others in the building sector touch on air quality, indoor air quality in some way. But unfortunately, this also translates sometimes to no one's job. And, I'll just pause there. There's a lot of specifics I could speak to on how these various functions are incentivized and what they own and don't own, and how this kind of piece of proactive performance monitoring can fall between the cracks. If there's interest, we can discuss.
Great. Thank you, Seema. I'm going to go to Vinny next. Vinny and I actually met on social media and got to know each other. And I was just so impressed what he and his colleagues at Safer Together are doing. You already mentioned broadly what you're doing, Vinny. But can you maybe give us some additional insights into who you've been helping, how specifically you've been helping them, but also any obstacles that Safer Together has in trying to help those where disparities are very, very obvious in society?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Corsi. I'll try to be as succinct as possible. COVID-19 is a public health emergency, threatened everyone at one point. And as we continued to layer in tools in response to a pandemic, the threat of an emergency started to recede for many individuals at different rates. And so we've seen this in parallel across multiple public health issues that are intractable in our communities, whether it's emergency room visits due to chronic pulmonary disease or physical and gun violence. The issues of concern for a lot of public health practitioners typically are rooted in communities that have larger structural drivers of the harm that communities are experiencing. And so a lot of the neighborhoods and communities that we focus on at Safer Together are communities that have a long history of poor health outcomes due to factors that are beyond the control of any one individual. And so through the course of the pandemic, we focused our testing in 10 high priority neighborhoods. These were the same neighborhoods in San Francisco that consistently exhibited the highest case rates of COVID-19 infections. And these are the same neighborhoods that consistently index at the highest levels on environmental justice risk indices based on a number of social vulnerability factors, environmental factors, as well as demographic factors. And so in combination with our clinical diagnostic testing, what we did was we engaged impacted community members and we paid them to be part of a frontline approach to outreach. And part of the outreach in our work was to increase the utilization of tools. So it's one thing to increase access to a tool, but if communities are not using the tool, then the access is ineffective. And so we do that on a multi-pronged basis through health education, teaching people about tools such as using testing to break transmission chains and using air transmission to improve indoor air quality to lower the risk of ongoing transmission of COVID-19. And it's been a really rewarding experience because we are investing in capacity for these communities to prepare them to confront many public health issues in addition to COVID-19. And and really investing in agency and giving them tools to self-determine how to take care of their community's health and their household's health.
Yeah, thank you. And that behavioral aspect of all of this is so important. I know in the indoor air quality field in the past, there have been studies where large numbers of families in Detroit, for example, and other cities have been given really good HEPA air cleaners. These are all families with children that have asthma. They find that the use rate is initially relatively high, and then it drops off really quickly. Within a couple of weeks, nobody's using the HEPA air cleaners anymore. So it defeats the purpose if you have a device that'll actually help you and you never use it, right? So there is this behavioral element. I really appreciate that. Christina, you've been doing some really cutting edge research on sensor technologies related to trace organic chemicals and outdoor air, and also for human breath analysis. But you've decided, I think relatively recently, maybe I'm wrong, but to find applications for your research related to indoor air quality. So can you tell us a bit about the sensors that you're using, the sensors you're researching, the sensors you're developing, and how you think they might be used to improve indoor air quality in the future?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So my research group has been focused on chemical sensors for volatile organic compounds for some time. What's so interesting is I think during the wildfire seasons that we've had in recent years in Northern California, we all become aware of things like the AQI, the air quality index, which is small particulate matter. But we also can smell the volatile organic compounds that are in the environment at the time as well. And that's a separate fraction that we are very interested in, because those environmental contaminants, these volatile organic compounds, they're just natural products of combustion. So we can see them when we combust fuel sources, and then we can see them when we have air quality issues. So what's interesting about this to me is that these types of chemical sensors are not pervasive more than they could be, and I think they should be. So we just look at our cell phone. We have optics, so we can take pictures with it. We can record audio. It's got a sense of sound, but it doesn't have a sense of smell. And that's a technical gap that we'd really like to see is, maybe not always in cell phones, but we'd like to have sniffers, that can be widely deployed, that can help detect these compounds, because they're really around us all the time. And they are especially found in indoor air environments. And so they can relate from everything from personal products to choices for cleaning products that are in different indoor spaces. And yet, while some of the regulatory mechanisms for these are set at thresholds that are quite high, what we don't know is how pervasive and at what levels are they in just normal everyday life. We can smell them. So our chemical sensors are specifically meant to be low power, mobile. So we would like to put them in things like cell phones, but also maybe on cars when they're driving around, so that you can get crowdsourced data on volatile compounds that are in environments. But more specifically, what we've also been thinking about lately is that these are great mechanisms to try to use as controllers for HVAC systems. So could you use these as a way to have the filtering set in your indoor air environments? Can you use data-driven ways to make some of these clean air choices for indoor environments, so that we can actually measure what's there and then take action that would actually improve the conditions? And that's where I think that these can have a key role. We're doing something else with them too these days, which is humans, as in general, we put off lots of volatile organic compounds. We all smell, and it's not just skin; it's also in effluents that come off of us, including breath. So not just sources of infectious diseases, but also sources of health information. So we have some other work going on where we're trying to utilize those compounds that are coming out in how we smell as a way to try and provide medical diagnostics or health monitoring. And so that's a really exciting area, coupled with indoor air environments, because as Dean Coursey pointed out, we spend so much of our time indoors. And so a lot of these technical topics are actually tied together. So really appreciate you guys having us here today to talk about this.
Thank you, Christina. And I think you just defined a new product, the iNose. Right. So let's go to Elizabeth now. Elizabeth, you're the chief of one of the most respected, probably the most respected state research division in the United States that deals with air quality, and probably one of only a few that actually does research related to indoor air quality and promotes research related to indoor air quality. And I was wondering if you could provide some insights into the types of research done on indoor air quality in the research division at the California Air Resources Board. And although you've touched on this slightly, maybe expand a little bit on how the results of that research are actually used in the state of California.
Great. Thank you so much. And I want to start out just saying I appreciate the panelists, my fellow panelists, so much. It's always great to hear what everybody else is doing. It gives me ideas too about where we can go. So it's great to be part of such a distinguished panel with so much interesting research going on. CARB has actually had a dedicated indoor air quality research program for over 30 years. And so I can't touch on every single thing we've done and what it's led to, but there's been quite a few really pivotal and important things that have come out of the indoor air quality program and in conducting cutting edge research over those last 30 years. I would say one of the major milestones was the 2005 legislative report, which identified key indoor air pollutants and prioritized key sources that we needed to minimize people's exposure to those pollutants. And it also established indoor air quality guidelines that we're actually now looking at updating. So that report led to a couple of key regulatory programs at CARB, including the composite wood regulation and the air cleaner certification program that I touched on. So composite wood, just to give a little bit of info on that, set limits for formaldehyde emissions in composite wood panels that are in people's houses. And that's had a direct impact on what people breathe in from furniture from all those wood panels. And I'll later discuss some of our current efforts to update that 2005 report. We've also had I'll just touch on some recent projects and what they've led to. So we've had research that's led to changes in building code standards and improved indoor air quality in California residents. For example, we have a ventilation and indoor air quality in new home study that was completed back in 2009 and found that new homes had low outdoor air exchange rates, which could lead to actually high levels of air pollutants indoors and low indoor air quality. And so that supported the update of California building codes. And then the reducing in-home exposure study that combined ventilation and air cleaning systems for pollutant removal and energy use. And those findings showed that the use of MERV 13 to MERV 16 filtration on the central forced air systems reduced level of PM 2.5 indoors by 90 to 97%. And so those results supported strengthening air filtration requirements in the 2019 California Building Energy Codes. And we just completed a study on multi-unit homes and investigated the impact of different levels of the compartmentalization or air tightness between units in multifamily houses. Mm-hmm. And those are being used and being looked at in updating future building codes as well. So that's another one. So we have some direct regulations that we ourselves have done. And then we also work with our sister agencies on building codes updates and doing research that will support that. And I just wanted to mention some ongoing projects. We have a project that's looking at impacts of filtration in elementary schools, another one that's more focused on San Joaquin Valley. And then we have a white paper that's looking on kind of getting to what you were talking about on behavior change. And so this is looking at guidance to vulnerable communities and priority communities for the use of indoor air quality. And so how do we use those low-cost sensors in a way that is informative to people and helps them make decisions on when their exposure might be high and when they may need to protect themselves. So that's something that we're really interested in and looking towards. Like I said, one of the more important things that I wanted to mention is we are in the process of updating that 2005 indoor air quality report. It led to a lot of important programs, and we really want to make sure that that is up to date, and that we investigate new and persisting indoor air quality concerns, identify factors that may lead to disproportionate exposure to air pollutants, indoor air pollutants, especially in impacted communities, and update the prioritization, because it's been a while since 2005, almost 20 years now. So it's time to look at that. And I'll end there. As you can see, we have a really rich history of projects that have focused on indoor air quality and exposure. And each year, just to make a little plug for ourselves, we do a research solicitation where we ask for ideas. So if you have ideas about research we could do on indoor air quality, please do get involved in that process. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I don't see any questions from the audience in the chat at the moment. And so I'm going to go ahead and forge ahead with a couple of questions for the panelists. And then after each question, we'll pause to see if there's any questions in the chat. So Elizabeth, you mentioned low-cost sensors. Seema, you mentioned low-cost sensors. Christina, you deal with higher cost sensors. I know, Vinny, you've used low-cost sensors in the field. So sensors is a common theme on the panel. And there's been an absolute proliferation of low-cost sensors on the market. And I think particularly during the pandemic, people have kind of clued into indoor air quality. And so a lot of people are buying optical particle sensors for fine particulate matter and carbon dioxide sensors. There are lower cost VOC sensors. And so the question for all of you is, how do you think we can best harness these sensors and all the data that are being generated with them, given that they all have some level of uncertainty and that we're dealing with individuals who are using them that may not be completely tuned in to the uncertainties of those sensors, et cetera. So how do we best harness these sensors to affect the quality of air in homes and commercial buildings and schools and other public buildings? And as a follow-up to that, what research do we still need to do on such sensors to achieve their potential? And that's an open question for the panel. Who would like to start? Don't make me have to call on one of you. Yeah, Vinny.
I'm happy to start that conversation. I think the most important thing is to build trust that these sensors protect the privacy and well-being of the people who are using them. A lot of these sensors now are part of a broader global network of sensors that are returning data back to reference points, aggregating data. So it's really important when these sensors are deployed that individuals understand what's being monitored and who it's being shared with. Because a lot of the highly impacted, high priority neighborhoods are really wary of surveillance. Mm-hmm. So it's really important that we understand the purpose of it, protecting the privacy concerns of individuals, and also supporting a real simple, straightforward sequence of care so that individuals understand that an air monitor reading is not enough to reverse the course of your health outcome. You need to apply tools, many of which are not connected to these sensors in a thoughtful way or in a simple way, so that we can really connect people to care pathways. And so we have to layer in trust in the tool itself and what happens after.
Yeah, those are all great points, Benny. Thanks. Seema, I've heard you speak about low-cost sensors before, so do you want to chime in?
Sure. And I'll maybe throw out something a little provocative that is a work in progress in my own head, which is I've come to really not see sensors as a replacement for a sort of lower cost version of what could be a higher cost thing. I think they're a fundamentally different tool. And when I'm in the world of sensors, I'm thinking much more in terms of indicators and how the sensors can be part of our whole suite of indicators. So for indoor air quality, thinking in terms of what the different problem classes are, and then how sensors and other pieces of information can serve as indicators for how we're performing on those different metrics or aspects, rather than, I really don't see sensors fitting into a scheme that's sort of parallel to the, Clean Air Act ambient scenario, where there's a list of contaminants and then you're measuring them now indoors at, distributed levels with sensors. So, I think that indicator mindset, and I think the research that needs to be done is really the implementation research. So it's about, almost process innovation, and then research to see how we can innovate processes, not just research into the technology. I mean, Christina, the research you're doing to develop the technology is so critical and it underpins everything, but it's not enough. There's the next layer of what happens then when these go out into real world complex systems. And that's not just, we often say, oh, that's practice and this is research, and actually research is needed on the right practice.
Absolutely. Elizabeth or Christina?
I'll just say 100% on that from the chem sensor side is that, just producing data is not enough. It's got to tie to action. And I think both Benny and Seema brought that up, and I think that's where we have a lot of work to do, first getting the sensor costs down, but then doing everything that you just said.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was just going to agree. One of the things that we're interested in is what sort of information is helpful in making change and creating change. Is it just people knowing what indoor air quality is? Is it something additional? And like Vinny was talking about, there's connections being made to people. So how do we provide information, not just information, but what to do with that information, and in a way that's really straightforward and easy and convenient for people? There's something that we could also get, recognizing what Vinny was saying about the concerns people have about data. It is also really helpful to have some of that crowdsourced data. So if there's a way to anonymize all of that and provide that trust with communities, which is critical, that can provide us some sort of get all of that data together to provide us some generalized information about things that may be a common thread on poor indoor air quality, that would be great as well.
Yeah, thank you. This was a great 4 responses to the question of lower cost sensors. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'm going to go to, I think we have a few more minutes left. I'm going to ask a question that might be too provocative for Elizabeth to answer, because it's sort of a policy related question, but we'll see what comes of it. So, having done research in both the outdoor world and the indoor world during my career, I'm sort of in tune with outdoor air quality and what led to where we are now with respect to outdoor air quality. So the Clean Air Act of 1970 led to the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, the first National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which looked nothing like our National Ambient Air Quality Standards today. The standards really evolved and changed over a 50-year period. We started with something, we learned more, research was done, and as research was done, we've arrived to where we are today. And I'd like your thoughts on whether you think something like a Clean Air Act, but rather a Clean Indoor Air Act or Clean Air Act amendments that include indoor environments is possible in our future. And if it is possible, where would we start, right? So, how might we go about it? What pollutants would we start with, just like we did in 1970 for the original Clean Air Act? How frequently would we measure, in what kinds of buildings? What would be the obstacles? Open-ended question, and we have about 3 minutes or so for us to chime in on it. So anybody want to take a shot at that? Number one, is it something that might actually happen someday? And if so, what might it look like? Don't make me have to call on one of you.
I'll just start with a quick thought, which is that I think a lot of those former regulations really started with tying together data with human health outcomes,
Right.
and understanding that. And part of that is having more ubiquitous sensors that can actually provide that data. But then the health outcomes piece has to happen so that that can help drive some of the thresholds, or to understand, this set of chemicals, doesn't have as much of an impact. This one over here really does. So I that's where I think some of the sensors can actually provide that data, which will take a while, but I think it's possible to get there.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right with your assessment, Christina. It all started with collecting a lot of data related to health associated with outdoor air pollution. Anybody else? We literally have about 30 seconds left. So last, Vinny, go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Corsi, I would say, that we really focus in on equity. We have enough data to know what the most highly impacted communities are. That a Clean Indoor Air Act means that those communities are supported in understanding what the cumulative effects of not having a Clean Indoor Act has had on those households, and serving them. And if we solve for them, we'll solve for everyone. Yeah,
great point, Vinny. All right, I think we're going to wrap up now. So I want to say thank you to Elizabeth Shealy of the California Air Resources Board, Seema Bangar of the U.S. Green Building Council, Vinny Ang of Safer Together, and my colleague Christina Davis from the University of California at Davis. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thanks to the audience for listening in. And thanks for the invitation to have this panel today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Dean Corsi, and many thanks to our expert panelists. It was really engaging, and I know we got the juices going and the questions coming in very late in the process. So hopefully we'll be able to chime in. If you feel like responding in writing to any of them, please feel free to do that. But we're really grateful for your time and really thoughtful panel.